It turns out having good code is the least important factor in a successful GitHub project. And today I'm going to expose the actual reasons most repositories become digital graveyards despite having perfectly functional code. You see, the conventional wisdom says, build it and they will come. But after analyzing hundreds of GitHub repos across various domains, well, I've discovered that that's complete and utter bollocks. You see, the recommendations I'm going to cover here today aren't theoretical concepts. They're battle-tested strategies used with projects such as React, TensorFlow, VS Code, and they used to build massive communities. And they're all approaches that we've used with hundreds of clients that we work with. Oh, and stick around to the end of this video because I'm going to share the single most counterintuitive insight of all that completely transformed how I approach every project on GitHub, and something that really flies in the face of everything developers are taught, but makes all of the difference between success and failure. So as I said, I'm going to break this video down into 5 fundamental principles. And for each of these, I'm going to give you some really practical things to get started with, okay? Now, the first one here is you've got to make sure that you create documentation that doesn't suck, okay? Your documentation is absolutely critical. And there's 4 things I want to recommend you do here. Now, but let's first of all talk about documentation. Documentation is typically an afterthought for most GitHub projects. People spend so much time working on the code that they kind of knock together some documentation in the easiest possible manner that they can. But then what happens is they kind of pull this together. It's a giant wall of text. It's difficult to read. It doesn't really tell a huge amount about the project other than getting it up and running. And then the people who are interested in your project kind of lose interest and they never use it, okay? So no matter how good your code is, if people cannot figure out how to use it, they will abandon it faster than a sinking ship, right? So there's 4 fundamental things that you want to do to deal with this, okay? The first thing is you want to make sure that you've got a 30-second README. Now, what this means is that someone is going to read your README file literally within 30 seconds and understand what your project is, why they should care about it, and how it can be used, okay? This is absolutely critical. Now, you're also going to want to put together a broader set of documentation, right? And there's a variety of tools that will make this easy to do. And this is where kind of ChatGPT and Claude and AI can be really helpful as well. But when you pull together your documentation and include in your README, make sure that you include visual aids. This is something that drives me bonkers about a lot of README files and developer documentation, is that people seem to forget that developers are visual creatures just like everybody else. Like, we understand things by looking at diagrams and pictures and images and things like that, right? So use visual aids. It's going to ease people in figuring out how to use your particular project. You also want to make sure that you include multiple skill levels, right? One of the things that we see all the time with the companies that we work with on their projects is they create like how to get started and up and running with this project, kind of like an onboarding guide. They provide their API documentation for that particular project, and then there's no middle ground, right? But what happens once somebody's got up and running and onboarded with the project? How do they go to the next level of depth? And then how do they go to the next level of depth, right? Keep adding in, right? Think of your documentation as important as the code in your project. It really is that critical. But also throughout all of this, you also want to make sure that you are conversational in how you write this documentation. This again is something that kind of drives me bonkers about a lot of developer documentation, is that it's written in a very kind of formal, dry kind of capacity. And I don't think anybody's particularly excited by that, right? So I'd recommend you go and check out Stripe. Their documentation is amazing. It looks like it's written by human beings, designed for human beings. They've got interactive examples in there. They let you try the functionality without leaving the page. You might also want to check out Django's documentation. That's amazing because they've created like legendary tutorials that will take you from zero to hero without assuming that you know everything. I remember when I started using Django, it's one of the things I really loved about it the most, okay? Now, all of this is important, right? But even perfect documentation is not going to save your project if people don't trust what you've built, right? And you want to avoid the worry that, the fear that your project's only going to be around for a short period of time. And our next step is going to cover exactly how to fix that particular issue. But before we get to that, if you're new around here, my name is Jono, and I've helped hundreds of companies and thousands of individuals build thriving technical user and developer ecosystems and communities with less hassle and better results. It's great to have you here on the channel. I hope you stick around. All right, so let's move on to our second one here. And this is where you want to make sure that you've got a predictable release schedule. Now, this is super important because, the GitHub landscape is absolutely littered with abandoned projects, right? Showing, that the last commit was sometime during the Obama era. And what you need to do here is to establish and communicate a really transparent release schedule that's really going to demonstrate that your project isn't kind of one power outage away from some kind of digital oblivion, right? So, the reason why this is really important is that contributors and users really need to know that you're going to be around, that you're not going to be a fly-by-night moment. So what you want to do is you want to focus on 3 fundamental things as you do this, right? And if you want a bit of inspiration about why this is important, one particular project you should definitely check out is going to be Linux, like the Linux kernel, right? They've had a regular release schedule running like clockwork for decades, and it's created a ton of trust around Linux, especially back in the early days when a lot of people would write Linux off as being a project that, really, is this kind of open source kernel going to go anywhere? Well, yeah, it went everywhere. But also kind of Vue.js is also a great example of a project. They published their roadmap that really communicates kind of which features are coming, and it prevents that kind of like, is this thing dead anxiety, right? So the first thing I'd recommend you do is that you display your project status, right, at the top of your README file. I'm going to put README here. This might sound obvious, right? But when people go to that project, if you can say whether this is, kind of actively maintained or whether it's been deprecated, this is going to help a ton in making sure that people know that the project's alive. It sounds really simple. It takes 2 minutes to do, but it's actually going to help. And then this, when paired with a regular release cadence, is going to mean that as people come and check out your project and they see that it's alive, and then they see that you're shipping, once every 2 weeks, once every month, once every quarter, it doesn't really matter what the cadence is. It just matters that there is a cadence, right? It matters that somebody can go and see there's been 5 releases in this particular time frame, and these releases are regularly coming out, right? So don't feel like you have to fit some other projects' release cadence. Just pick something that works well for you and settle on that. That's going to be the best thing to do. And then the other thing you're going to want to do here is to respond quickly to issues, right? This is, again, all about showing that this project is vibrant and alive and thriving, right? This is making sure that, when somebody kind of submits an issue or a pull request, go and respond, ideally, within 48 hours. Right? Even if you're just saying, hey, I've seen this, appreciate you submitting this, I'll check this out later on, right? It all builds a sense of confidence in what you're building here, right? So documentation makes people get up and running really quickly and easily. Most projects don't do a great job of this, so this is an opportunity to shine. A predictable release schedule enables that people feel confident that this is something that's going to be around for the long term, right? So we're heading in the right direction. Now, by the way, if you're finding this video useful, it would mean the world to me if you could throw a quick like on this video. It might sound a little kind of contrived, but likes really help small channels like mine out a ton. And I just want to make videos that people are going to find useful. So liking this video would be awesome. And a sub to this channel, well, that would absolutely mean the world, okay? Now, we've covered like documentation and predictable release schedule, right? But great docs and maintaining your code is really only half the battle, right? Because you're also going to make sure that you can maintain the humans who are involved in the project. Yes, there's projects that are out there on GitHub that are kind of like written by a single person and dumped up there, but most projects are a team effort, right? And this is where you're going to want to have an anti-hostile community. Now, what is an anti-hostile community? Well, a lot of GitHub projects out there kind of treat newcomers like they're interrupting a private conversation between geniuses. Like, they're often kind of pretty rude and mean-spirited, and you ask a question and it's like, oh, TFM, right? Well, those people suck because they're typically elitists who just want to wallow in their own particular project, right? What you want to do here is you want to create a really inclusive environment that doesn't make people feel like they need 3 PhDs just to ask a question inside of your project, right? So The reason why this is important is that the difference between thriving and dying projects really isn't code quality, right? It's whether people actually want to be part of your community. If you look at, a great example of this is Rust, right? Rust community is famous for like a really welcoming approach for beginners, despite being a pretty complicated programming language. Or Free Code Camp, they've maintained an amazingly supportive environment, like despite the massive scale of Free Code Camp, and they've got moderators who really kind of actively guide newcomers, right? So, there's many, many examples of amazing projects that are doing this, right? So there's kind of 4 things I want you to cover here, right? Let me make sure I can actually get these on the screen at the same time. 1, 2, 3. Can we get it on there? Oh, we're getting to the bottom of the desk here, right? The first thing is I'm going to recommend that you put together issue and pull request templates, right? This might sound nothing to do with the community, but what this does is issue and pull request templates are basically an easy way in which you can capture certain types of information when somebody submits an issue or a pull request. And what it does is it makes sure that when somebody takes the initiative to add an issue or a pull request, right, what's going to happen here is that you're going to make it as quick and as efficient as possible for them. You're going to streamline the experience of them submitting something. And that is in service of making your community better. Instead of like somebody submits a kind of a not very good issue, and then you have this back and forth where you're constantly asking for more information, okay? The other thing you're going to want to add in here, and this might sound kind of obvious, but a lot of people don't have this, is a code of conduct. Oh, conduct. That looks terrible. Let me wipe that off, my friends. Okay, I'll say smear that everywhere. Hang on. A code of conduct. I think I made more of a mess than I should have done. Let me wipe that down. So, what is a code of conduct? It's basically a set of principles that say, please everybody, behave using these kind of expectations within our community. It's essentially the way of saying, just be excellent to each other. There's many codes of conduct out there. I'm totally biased on this one. I'd recommend you check out the Ubuntu Code of Conduct. You can see a link down there in the description for where you can find it. It's under a Creative Commons license. We spent a bunch of time putting it together. It's a really balanced code of conduct, but there's a number of them out there. It doesn't really matter which one it is. Just pick one and put it on your project, right? Do not go and create your own code of conduct. It's a massive amount of work. Just use an existing one, okay? Now, what you also want to do here is celebrate first-timers. First-timers. Because when people join your project for the first time, right, and they submit their first issue or the first pull request, especially when code gets added into, like when it gets merged into your project, this is a huge moment for that particular person, right? So celebrate them, post about it on your Discord, on your blog, and your social media networks, make a little video about them, right? Recognize them. There's no risk of like over-recognizing somebody, right? So just get out there and spread the word about how great they are. They're gonna really love that. And then the other thing that you're gonna wanna implement here is gonna be what's called good first issue. And this is basically where you can have this as kind of like a tag on issues in GitHub. And there's various mechanisms to be able to find these. These are kind of a great way for somebody who's brand new to a project to be able to kind of go in there and fix something that's going to be really useful. This can often be great for, missing unit tests, for typos and issues and things like that. Just really simple issues that just need fixing. It's a great place for someone to start and get something into the project. All right. So, great documentation, predictable release schedule, a really kind of thriving community. And we've got a ton of videos on my channel about how to build great communities. So check out my other videos if you're interested in that. But even with a welcoming community, your project is going to need vision, right? It's going to need focus, right? And if you don't have clear vision in your project, if people don't have a sense of like where you're going, where you're moving to, one, they're going to lose confidence in you. And two, they're going to get bored. Right? Like if your vision's just, if your project's just in permanent maintenance mode and it's not moving in a direction, people are generally going to get uninterested and move on. So our fourth one here is, rather unsurprisingly, a clear vision. Now, you might be thinking, okay, what's this all about? Like, why is vision important? Well, most GitHub projects, they kind of begin with a ton of enthusiasm. There's fireworks, everyone's excited, but they lack kind of a clear purpose behind, beyond kind of scratching the initial creator's immediate itch. Most open source projects are started by somebody solving something that they're struggling with, okay? So what you want to do here is to articulate a really compelling vision that explains why your project exists in the first place, where it's going, and like the aspirations for the future. Because there's people out there that think that developers can't be inspired. Like developers are like such logical machines that they never get inspired by anything. But that's complete nonsense. Developers get inspired by the opportunity of building something exciting. Like I remember when I was at Canonical, we were building the Ubuntu community. We had hundreds of thousands of people join that project because they were inspired about building something bigger and better than they'd seen before, right? So without a clear direction, without a clear vision, projects just kind of drift into feature soup or stagnation as contributors kind of pull in different directions, right? So what I want you to do here is I want you to do 4 things again. 1, 2, 3, 4. The first is that you should create a really clear project charter. This is basically going to be a single document that you write, and it's a vision for what you're doing here. When people work with us in the community leadership call, one of the first things we always ask them to do is to put together this charter, right? Especially if they're building a new project. Because if you're not clear on like where you're going, what you want to achieve, then you're going to kind of miss the boat on this one. And what should go into the charter, right? Well, ideally what you're going to do is you're going to have a few things. The first thing is you're going to have like, the mission of the project, You might want to also outline some values. Like what are the things that you consider to be important in the project? It could be things like, we'll always be open source. We'll always be focusing on accessibility. We'll make sure we focus on open data, whatever it might be, right? Then as part of the charter, you're going to want to have some milestones. Like what are the things that we want to get to kind of start rolling out this charter? And then you're also going to want to focus on how do people get started and contribute? If they read the charter, they're excited by it. How do they come in and participate? Okay, so that's the first thing. You also want to identify your design philosophy. And I don't mean visual design philosophy when I say this. I mean the design of how you're thinking about building your project. And it could incorporate visual design if you want, but what's your idea behind this? For example, if you're building an operating system, right? Maybe your design philosophy is that you're going to build like the lightest weight, the lightest possible kernel operating system. You're going to make it modular. You're going to have fundamental subsystems. Like this is kind of how Linux is designed, right? There's a very clear design philosophy in how it's structured and how that project runs, right? And the reason why we want this in addition to your project charter is your project charter is the inspirational hand-wavy vision of the future. Your design philosophy is the responsible person sat there saying, well, this is how we're going to actually go about achieving that and pulling it together, okay? You're also going to want to make sure that you have really clear contribution. That is, I just didn't even attempt to write that word correctly. Okay, let's try that again, Jono. Okay. Really clear contribution guidelines. I'm amazed you people watch my videos. My handwriting is so bad, right? And as you can tell, we already kind of talked about this a little bit inside of the project charter. So there's no reason why you couldn't just kind of have like this piece link off to the contribution guidelines. And this should be like, how do you like get started? How do you download the project, compile it and build it? What are the coding standards? How do people submit contributions? What are the requirements when it comes to things like tests? Make sure you get those written down. And again, going back to what we talked about earlier when we talked about documentation, we always want to avoid a wall of text. No walls of text. Keep them as simple as possible, right? Simplicity is the ultimate sophistication when we're thinking about this. And then the final one here is you're also going to want to make sure that you have like really clear roadmap updates, right? So as you're kind of like releasing new updates and features in your project, get them out there on a regular release cadence. There's various tools out there that can make this really easy for you to kind of publish roadmap updates. But the reason why this is important is that when we identify our clear vision, we say like, this is where we're going, here's how we're building it, here's how you can get started, and here's the progress we're making. That's why it's broken into those 4 fundamentals, right? So, if you want food for thought and inspiration around this, you can go and check out, for example, Postgres. They've got an amazing reputation for like reliability and clearly articulating which features kind of belong in core versus extensions. Also React, like their philosophy of like learn once, write anywhere, has really been kind of a clear North Star for that particular project and for all of the decision making there, right? So it's a very, very powerful way of doing it. Now, if you want to figure out the most effective way of building an awesome GitHub project, if you want to build an awesome user community or developer engagement and build a real ecosystem around what you're doing, you should absolutely check out our community leadership core. We're kind of like a personal trainer for how to build amazing audiences and ecosystems. We help you to figure out what work will have the biggest impact, how to dial in that work and make sure that it's as efficient and as effective as possible. And then we hold you accountable and check in with you. So we're kind of like a co-pilot in helping you to move forward and make regular progress. If you want to find out more about the Community Leadership Core, go and check out the description down there, okay? All right, so now let's move on to our fifth one here. And you know what's been bugging me since I started this video is I wrote this number originally, but now it's too close to this text and it's kind of annoying me. If that was annoying you as well, get it down into the comments because let's see how many of the weirdos out there found that irritating. So I'm going to put 5 over here, okay? So we just talked about the clear vision, and the clearest vision in the world is not going to matter. The best docs in the world is not going to matter. A predictable release schedule is not going to matter. An amazing community is not going to matter. None of this stuff is going to matter if people can't find your project, right? So this is the thing that many people find a little controversial, and often when we'll work with companies around kind of building a thriving open source or a GitHub project, they'll often push back a little bit on this, right? And that is what you need to do to build a great GitHub project is you need to become a content marketer. Now, I know I used the word marketer there, right? And I know you don't like that word, right? But here's the thing. A lot of developers are of the view that great code markets itself. If the code is doing great, we're going to get a ton of GitHub stars, and then everybody will know about it, and then boom, success. But that is the definition. If you build it, they will come. It does happen in some cases, but it certainly doesn't happen in most cases, right? So what we want to do here is you want to implement really deliberate distribution strategies that will get your project out there in front of other people. That's fundamentally what marketing is doing. It's connecting value with a market, and a market in this particular instance is going to be developers who might find use in your project, or users might find use in your project, right? So essentially, in a world with millions of repos, there's a ton of noise out there, hundreds of millions of lines of code. This visibility doesn't happen by accident. It requires, in many cases, as much effort as putting the code together in itself, right? So there's 3 really fundamental things I kind of want you to focus on here, okay? The first one is you've got to create regular content, okay? Now, this is going to be, there's loads of ways in which you can do this, right? There's so many different mechanisms to create content, right? You can put up social media, you can do blog posts, you can do video. I'm going to underline this one because video is really particularly powerful because people can see your project in action and they get really excited about it, right? You can go on podcasts, right? And here's the thing, this stuff is really fun. Going out there and talking about your project and getting people excited about it is really fun, right? You can go to events, you could do online events. There's all kinds of things that you can do to get creative, right? What you're going to want to do is pick one of these and just get started. And I would recommend that one is going to be social, right? So just as you're releasing your roadmap updates, as you're releasing your schedule, your new releases, get them up on your social media networks, right? For most developers, it's going to be X and it's going to be LinkedIn. Those are the 2 platforms. Focus on just getting regular stuff out, posting as often as you can. What that is on my desk. All right. Now what you want to do as well is you want to go out there and what I call meet the peeps. And what I mean by this is get out there into the communities, into the places where your potential users are going to be, and just go mingle, just go chat to them, right? So go into subreddits, go to meetups, go to online events, talk to people in LinkedIn groups, talk to people on X, go into YouTube videos, about what you're doing and share that you're building it in the description, in the comments of YouTube videos. Just get out there and do it. And what I'd recommend you do is with each of these is, with this one, just pencil in like 15 minutes a day, right? You could just say, okay, hang on. I'm making a mess again, everyone. Making a mess. You could just do 15 mins a day. Just get out there, 15 minutes, just go and poke around and see what you can do to go and meet people and help, right? And then the other thing I'm gonna recommend you do is that you work with other projects, right? Is to go and look at which other projects are kind of related to the things that you're doing. Like, for example, I gave the example of the Linux kernel earlier on, right? The Linux kernel in itself is a kernel, right? But other projects would include places like Ubuntu or Red Hat or Debian or Slackware or the Raspberry Pi project, right? Different places where that kernel is going to exist. Go, meet up, get to know these different people, see how you can kind of collaborate and integrate with each other, and that is just going to grow the visibility and the awareness of your particular project as well, right? So let me move this out the way. As we kind of take a recap on this, I just want to cover this real quick. Make sure you have documentation that is simple. It's not a wall of text. It's really clear for how people can get up and running with your project, how they can move to the next level, and how they can use it like an expert level, okay? Expert level. Make sure you have a predictable set of releases, right? Prove to the world that your project isn't dead. That's fundamentally what we're doing here, right? Make sure you don't just focus on a community that is anti-hostile, but make sure you focus on a community that's actively inclusive and welcoming, right? Streamlining how people can join with your issue and PR templates, codes of conduct, celebrating people, all that stuff. Put together a really clear vision of what people can expect from your project as you move forward. Inspire people around what you're building. And then get out there every day to put content out on social media, blogs, videos, podcasts, anything else. Just get the word out there. And these are all critical, right? If you do these 5 different things, I promise you, if you work really hard at this, your project is not going to fail, right? These are the things that are required. It's not just about building the code, okay? Now, one of the most interesting things about developers, in my mind, is developers are kind of a funny breed. And the way in which we build engagement, the way in which we interact with them, is not just about kind of things like social media and blogs and video and whatever else. What it's fundamentally about is tapping into the psychology of how developers think and act. And the good news here is that there are 6 hidden developer traits that you can kind of target and delve into to kind of shortcut how you build engagement with them. So if you go and check out this video over here, I'm going to walk through each of these 6 psychological traits. The science behind this is kind of interesting, and I'm going to give you super practical ways in which you can tap into those 6 psychological traits to really speed up how developers check out your project. So go check out that video next, and I'll see you there.